All right. So my name is Crystal Malik. I am an immigration attorney at McCandless Fulton in Richmond, Virginia. I do these talks at universities across the country, and the goal is just really kind of get you familiarized with what work options you have while you're in school and what work options you have after school, whether that be non-immigrant visas or green cards, um, whatever there is available to you. We're going to talk just a little bit about green cards, not too much because it's not as pertinent to students as everybody thinks it is. Um, you need some kind of a non-immigrant stopgap between your school and your green card to allow you to maintain status and stay in the US and work. So we're going to spend a lot more time talking about work options, work visa options, temporary work visa options than anything else. The information on the screen is my contact information. If you have questions after the presentation, I recommend that you email me. We do answer questions from students all across the country for free. If you have to have some kind of immigration process, then we would let you know what the fees for those things would be, but we're able to answer questions normally by email without cost. All right, so we're going to be spending most of our time today just kind of talking about F1 and H1B. Those are going to be the primary pieces that we talk about. Are all three of you guys F1 students?
F1.
Yes. Okay, great. All right. It's important to note that any of the visas that we talk about today, you can have dependents with you on those visas. There'll be a dependent for your green card, a dependent for your non-immigrant visas. Dependents mean a spouse or a child who is under the age of 21. You can have any one of these visas will allow you to have a spouse or children under 21 follow you. All right. When you're working as a student, you're going to be talking to Jen over and over and over again to get permission to work, to find out what the guidelines are for your specific work authorization. You're always going to be working with her. After you graduate, you're going to be working with her to apply for your OPT, to apply for your STEM OPT, to talk about your other options and how it's going to integrate with your F1 status. Super, super important that you keep in contact with your ISS, your DSO, constantly, the entire time that you're in F1 status, even after you graduate. Each one of these options that you see on your screen, I'm going to go through them briefly, but anytime that you have a question about one of those, you're going to want to talk to your DSO. Your DSO also, I am certain of it, offers in-services constantly throughout the year to help you with these processes and to describe this information. Really important to attend those sessions because they have a wealth of information to share and a lot of responsibility to help you and to make sure that you're getting what you need. So it's really important. So the first type of employment is on-campus employment. Any F1 student can do on-campus employment for student services up to 20 hours a week during the school year. Those don't have to have special authorizations. It's something that you're allowed to do. But definitely if you're in doubt about whether or not it qualifies as on-campus employment, go to your DSO and talk to them. Curricular practical training is a type of work authorization that you can have as part of your degree program. It's called curricular practical training, CPT. It's authorized directly through your DSO. It's usually done with extra paperwork from your department. It has to be a project, a program, a type of work that is integral to your program. Think about work study, think about internships, think about for nursing students, you may have to go do clinicals. These are things that you're going to want to talk to your department and to your DSO about to make sure that you get it authorized on your I-20. Whenever you're doing something that's going to be classified as curricular practical training, you don't have to have any separate authorization from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. You're working straight through your DSO. You're doing all of the paperwork that's required, paying any fees that are required, and it gets written into the extra pages of your I-20. It tells exactly where you're working. It tells what dates you're working, and you have to be very, very careful to make sure that you don't exceed the dates that you're allowed. So that if a learning opportunity switches dates, you need to notify your DSO so that they can correct your SEVIS record. Curricular practical training can be part-time or full-time. If you start doing full-time curricular practical training, you have to start monitoring the number of days because curricular practical training, if you get more than 365 days, if you get 365 days or more, it can impact whether or not you can use option number 3, which is optional practical training. For every degree level that an F1 student does inside the United States, they're eligible for 12 months of optional practical training. The optional practical training can be used pre-graduation or post-graduation. The majority of students use it as post-graduation because it does require authorization from your DSO, your ISS. It gets noted onto your CVIS record. And then you actually apply for an employment authorization document from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That does take about 3 to 5 months to come back unless you use premium processing. And premium processing is super expensive. So most people use it as postgraduate optional practical training so that they can have 12 months at one time. They only have to pay one application fee. They only have to wait 1 4-month increment to get their practical training. And they want that full 12 months. So everybody gets 12 months. If you're a STEM student, like Victor is our STEM student here today, you'll get an additional 2 years of work authorization on top of that 1 year of regular STEM OPT for a total of 3 years. If you use up all of your curricular practical training and aren't eligible for that first year of OPT, you lose all 3 years. So it's super, super important to monitor the number of days that you use of full-time curricular practical training. You don't have a limit if you're only doing part-time curricular practical training. It's the full-time days that matter. Option number 4 is economic hardship. There are several countries right now that are designated blanket economic hardship, and that's based on natural disasters that have occurred in their country, war and political strife that's happening. If you're from one of those specific countries, you can talk to your DSO, you get it authorized through your I-20, and then you apply for a work authorization document from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This economic hardship option can be used individually as well. So if you have a personal crisis, illness of a parent that affects them and makes it so that they can't work and they can't supply you with money for your tuition, something specific that happens to you here that causes you not to be able to pay tuition, you can apply for one of these economic hardships as well. So there's 2 options. One is blanket country designations, and the other is personal actual economic hardship to you specifically. There are designated international organizations that will allow you to be kind of sponsored. Basically, they hire you and then you apply for a work authorization card. Those are not limited and they don't impact your optional practical training. So if you had one of these designated organizations, 3 of them are listed on the screen, but there's an actual regulatory whole list of these organizations that can use this option for you. You would work with your ISS, you would apply for a work authorization document, and then you'd be able to work for these companies. The question we always get is whether or not you can volunteer for a company who doesn't want to pay you. And with that, you have to be very, very careful. Even if they don't pay you, it is still work if it's productive labor. So if you're doing something that is assisting the company, that's productive work for them, even if they don't pay you, that's still work under the regulations. So you got to make sure that you're not just thinking that it's a line of what am I paid or am I not paid. Volunteer work is allowed if it's a true volunteer opportunity. So let's say that you go to a soup kitchen for the holidays and you're helping the homeless, or you're working at a volunteer pet organization. Those things are real, true volunteer opportunities, and they're not paid for anybody. When those things would be allowed. But if it's something that actually is a work opportunity, you're going to need to probably make sure that you get it authorized through one of these other methods. Jen, I saw you wanted to say something to add.
Yeah, so just to clarify, and Mila had asked about the STEM and what does that mean. And I think B and I had this conversation a few times, but currently, just to clarify, for myself, nursing does not fall under that right now, correct?
Right now it does not. So the way that you find out if you're a designated student is the CIP code that's on the cover of your I-20. There's a list that's published by the Department of Homeland Security. You can just Google it, make sure you're on the DHS website, because that website is official and it gives you the exact CIP codes that you have to compare it to. And if your CIP code on the front of your I-20 is designated as a STEM field, that's how you get it. It's very stupid to me that nursing is not classified as a STEM field. It doesn't make any actual sense. But I think it's probably a Department of Labor thing. The push-pull in immigration is always how do we get the most from these international students and take the least away from US workers, right? It's always this push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. I need to protect US workers. And so probably there was some kind of negotiation behind the scenes that kept nursing off of that list. Medicine's also not on that list because if they don't put medicine on that list, then they can make the person go to a J1. And the J1 has a 2-year foreign residency requirement, which makes them do a service requirement before they can waive. So there are all sorts of push-pull and negotiations behind the scenes in immigration that keep things like nursing from being on the STEMS list, even though it is clearly a STEM field.
Thanks.
Okay.
That's just a question that I've only been doing this for a short time,
it
and I've
makes
gotten a
no
few times.
sense. No sense at all. It makes no sense at all, but that's the way it is. So it's more a question of whether it's on the list than is it actually in reality a STEM field.
Okay, thanks.
Did it make the list? All right. So for you guys who are F1 students who are having to try to find employment, it's just an extra added layer of difficulty, right? You have to be able to understand the immigration system on top of the normal stressors of a student who's getting ready to graduate. Normally, a student has to worry about finding a job, and that's enough stress as it is. But you guys, as international students, also have to be able to explain to your employers how they can hire you, how they can keep you, how this is an actually manageable system on top of finding a position. So the big thing to keep in mind as you're doing this is that employers really do like the qualities that you bring. Our experience is that every single year, there's new employers who've never filed anything for immigration, who just find one of you international students that they just can't part with. They have to have you on their team, and they make sure to take the steps that are necessary in order to sponsor you and have you working for them permanently. So understand that employers really do like the qualities that international students bring, whether that be the motivation, the independence, the entrepreneurial nature that it takes to come to the United States to go to school, right? Whether that be linguistic or cultural advantages that you have because you've been other places besides just here. The typical path that we're going to talk about is your F1 optional practical training, whether that's 12 or 36 months, academic training, which can be that J1, or H1B. Now, the big deal here is that I've got 2 of you who are nursing students and won't qualify for H1B in most cases. We'll talk about a little bit more about why that is. The real true story is most nurses end up with bachelor's degrees in the United States. Most jobs are requiring that you either have an associate's when you start, but you have to go up to a bachelor's degree before you finish. But that's not enough to qualify for H1B. When the H1B program was first implemented, there was a special classification for nurses, H1C, and they let it expire many years ago and did not renew it. There's no talk of renewing it now because there's no talk of doing anything good in immigration these days. And so we don't have any expectation it'll come back, but we'll talk a little bit about because I know I have so many of you in here, we'll talk a little bit about what the special circumstances are for nurses. And then we'll talk about the green card process, whether that be family or employment based. All right, so the difference between what we're talking about here, permanent green cards versus temporary non-immigrant visas. Green cards are when you want to live in the US permanently. You want to spend almost all of your time here. You want to be on the path to getting US citizenship is essentially what a green card is for. It allows you an ease of travel. You can work for any employer. They're generally good for 10 years at a time, and you just have to renew them, and it does put you on a path to US citizenship. The non-immigrant visas, we have a lot of different classes of those in the United States. They go from A to V, but they all have their own individual rules and limitations. Not every one of the classifications A to V will allow you to work in the US. Not all of them allow people to live in the US or stay longer than, a certain number of months. We're just going to focus on the F1 and the H1B because the H1B and the F1 is where you are now, and the H1B is where we would like to get you as a work permit. The H1B is most often used for US workers because it's the specialty occupation visa. It's for college graduates, people who have a bachelor's degree or higher in a specific specialty who've been hired for a position that requires that bachelor's degree. Let's see, I have a question, I think, in the chat. Can I apply for a J1 if I already had a J1 visa as an au pair? It is possible to do that. It'll depend on what new classification and the limitations of that classification. Always be careful. When you were an au pair, you didn't have to worry about what's called the 2-year foreign residency requirement. When you do other classes of J1, you have to check and make sure it's not going to subject you to a 2-year foreign residency requirement, where you have to leave the United States for a period of 2 years before you can change your visa status. So the considerations that employers are going to want you all to be able to talk to them about, they want to know the cost, how much it's going to cost them, the timing of the applications that are going to have to be filed, and obligations. What do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to? What do I have to report? What records do I have to maintain? When we're talking about the optional practical training, this is the lowest level of employer engagement. For this application, you as the student drive the entire thing. You can pay for it. You're the one who files it. You work with your international student office to get your I-20 and your SEVIS record updated. You file the application with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. You pay the fee. All of the guidelines that you see on your screen right now are firm, hard guidelines. This application can now be filed online, and so you have a lot of control over when you file it, but you have to make sure it fits into the criteria on the screen. If you miss any one of these deadlines by a day, they will deny the application, and there's no appeal that we can do that can help. The job that you're going to do while you're an OPT does require that it's required to be in your degree specialty. So if you're a nursing student, it's going to have to be in nursing. If you're a biology student, you're going to have to be able to explain how the job relates to your biology degree. During your first year of OPT, the employer has to do nothing. They just I-9 you, and that's the form that people fill out when they start a new job. They just I-9 you the same way that they would I-9 any of their employees. Nothing different. They don't have to do anything different with you than they do with any of their other employees. There's nothing else for them to file, nothing for them to sign off on. That they have no engagement other than hiring you. You're only allowed up to 90 days of unemployment during the year that you are working. So it's going to be really important that you either have a job at the time that you start, or you find something maybe part-time in your field to get you to keep under this 90 days of unemployment while you look for a full-time position. Sometimes that involves helping with, sometimes the university will offer positions to students who are having trouble finding jobs as something on campus that has to do with your specialty, or as a teaching assistant or things like that that relate to your specialty. If you're a STEM student, you've looked at your CIP code and it matches up with one of the classifications that's on the DHS website on their CIP list for STEM specialties, then you'll be eligible for this extra 24 months. This is where your employer first has to do something, but it's still very, very little at this point. Your employer has to be enrolled in E-Verify. E-Verify is just a government program where companies agree that they're going to enter their employees' documents into a specific system to check and make sure that they're work authorized, that they have legal work authorization. They have to be willing to sign what's called a training plan. The training plan is basically a little short 5-page document that you and the employer complete together. It has all the contact information for your DSO ISS at school. It has your information and your major information. And then there's a page where it talks about what the job duties are, how those job duties are related to your specialty, and how they're going to oversee your work to ensure that you are getting a meaningful learning experience while you're doing your 2 years of OPT. If your employer terminates your job, or you quit your job, or you never come to the job, they're required to notify your international student office at the time that you've stopped working for them. That's what they're required to do. They're required to sign off on this training plan. They're required to train you, and they're required to be e-verified. That's pretty much all that they're required to do at this time. For this application, you can see that it also has filing requirements. Your DSO has to give you an I-20 that authorizes you to apply. You're only allowed up to 150 days of unemployment total between your STEM OPT and your regular OPT. You're the one who files the application and pays for the application. And so your employer has very little skin in the game at this point. They can hire you, keep you from your regular OPT. They just have to make sure that they meet these requirements. Now, super important. I keep talking about you have to get an I-20 that's authorized by your DSO. The biggest issue that we're being contacted for right now for OPT denials in both classifications are people who try to get ahead of their international student office and they file their OPT application without it being authorized by their DSO. It has to be in the SEVIS record. The officer who looks at your OPT application is going to be able to see exactly when your DSO authorized you to apply. If you applied 10 minutes before they authorized you, your application is going to be denied because you have to have already been authorized to apply before you apply. It's just a stupid little rote rule that if you break it, they will deny your application and there's nothing we can do. And they take so long to deny it that you won't have time to reapply. So it's very important that you make sure that you're following all of the rules, that you're talking to your DSO, that you've got that I-20 already authorized before you ever apply.
Crystal, can you read that comment that's in?
Read the question. Okay.
It
applied
sounds
for
like what
OPT.
you just described a little bit.
I'm also happy to just explain the situation if you don't want to read.
Please do.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah. So I applied for OPT. It was supposedly on the 19th day before I was supposed to graduate, and the date was different in the CVIS recommendation submitted by my DSO and
It was
in
after the date you applied or before?
So I already got denied for this application because it came 3 days early. Right soon after I received the denial, I reapplied, but now I'm realizing that my reapplication would be more than 30 days after DSO CVIS recommendation.
Are you still within the right amount of time after you graduated?
So I still haven't graduated. So my first application was 90 days before graduation. Well,
Okay.
93. I thought 90. My
We
second
even looked
application,
at that on the calendar though, didn't we? So, I mean,
we
it
did.
doesn't matter for right now, but I guess.
Doesn't matter. But anyway, my first application, I thought it was 90 days. It was actually 93. My second application was 30 days before the end of the program date. But so there is a 2 months in between. Instead of
But
30
now
days,
the
it would be
reason
60
why
days.
is you think that you were authorized to apply more than 30 days before you refiled.
Yeah.
Jen, in CVIS, are you allowed to go in and reauthorize the application again, like to change that date?
Maybe. I didn't know about this, so I haven't tried.
Yeah, I was listening to you and
Yeah,
realized
well,
that
Katya,
that's the case.
yeah, so Katya, you need to get with Jen and see if there's anything that she can do. You may have to withdraw that application too and reapply if she's able to do anything in CVIS. So as an immigration attorney, I don't have access to CVIS. Only your DSO has access to that. And so she'll be able to figure out whether or not there is functionality for her to reauthorize it so that there's a new date and you can withdraw the other application and refile it within that date. Because since you haven't graduated yet, you're still within the other dates.
Yeah.
You just need it to be reauthorized for a new date. So Jen is the one you're gonna want to talk to after this.
To
and see if
withdraw
she's
the
able to-
application, do I just go through USCIS website?
Yeah, you would just
Okay.
withdraw the application there and you're gonna have to refile and repay the fees again. Yeah, it's really super important. There are so many ways to get it wrong. And that's why I sit here and I just emphasize it over and over and over again. You should, I think that she's going to be able to figure out a solution, but she's the one who has the functionality. You're going to have to check with her.
Thank you.
Can I ask you this question, Crystal? Should she cancel that application before I go in and do that so it doesn't
Yeah, I
cross
would say
again?
if you all look at it and you discover that she did in fact apply after it had already been 30 days past your
Definitely.
recommendation,
That's
if
definitely.
it was past that 30 days, then yeah, she's going to have to withdraw it and you're going to need to reauthorize it if you can. And I do have people in my office who have some experience with their 2 old DSOs that we've hired. If you need their help, let us know afterwards, okay?
Thank you.
Because they're CVIS experts. But yeah, if you're past that 30-day mark, you're gonna need to refile it again. Because redesignating it now after you've already filed won't help unless you're refiling after that.
Okay.
Okay. So hopefully we've just fixed a problem. Oh my goodness.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So now we get to where your employer starts having to do some of the work. All right, here's just your screen on what E-Verify is. Here's your screen on what a qualifying STEM degree is. Just a special note that hardly ever applies to anyone. But let's say that you did a STEM field degree in your bachelor's degree, and then you decided, I want to go do a master's degree in education. But I don't want to do my STEM, I don't want to use my STEM OPT first. I want to go do my master's. I want to get a master's. My new master's is not in a STEM field. At the end of your master's, you're eligible to go ahead and pick up that STEM OPT that you did not use from your bachelor's degree, as long as the degree was completed within the last 10 years. This doesn't apply to hardly anybody. I've seen probably 3 people talk to me about that it did apply to them and it was great for them. But just understand that this does exist in case it's something you want to take advantage of in the future. All right, travel on OPT. This screen is basically obsolete because we've just had an election. And, you know, it's going to be risky to travel for the whole first half of next year. Just, you need to keep in mind that we don't know what the rules are going to be, because the last time that this person was president, the rules were very, very much in flux. So you're going to want to think long and hard about any travel that you plan to do in the first half of next year until we kind of get into some kind of equilibrium and know what the rules are. When you're traveling on OPT or when you're traveling on F1, you always want to make sure that you have the documents that we see on the screen. Your travel endorsed I-20, your valid visa. If you're traveling with OPT, you want to have the EAD already in hand, and you want to have an employer letter, if at all possible, saying, hey, this person works for me. They're just going on vacation and they're coming back. If you have any of these items missing, it starts to be a little bit risky to travel. For instance, if you don't have a valid visa in your passport and you're going to have to process one while you're abroad. The reason for that is that every single time that you apply for a F1 visa, you have to prove non-immigrant intent. And that's a really squishy, topic, because the officer gets to make that decision and it's not reviewable. So if that officer has had bad Cheerios that morning and looks at you and goes, I don't like you, they don't have to have a reason to deny it. They just use what's called 214B, and they say, you had immigrant intent. I could tell. So every time that you apply for one of these visas, you have some kind of a small amount of risk at least, and depending on what country you're from, some countries that risk level is higher. So when you decide to travel, knowing that you're going to have to file to get a new F1 visa, it's really important that you calculate the amount of risk that you're willing to undergo for the trip. If you have already been selected for H-1B and you have one of those pending, not advised to travel during that period. I'm going to kind of skip over that today because H-1B doesn't apply to a lot of you today. But if you have questions about travel when your H-1B is pending, definitely talk to the attorney who filed your H-1B or contact me. H-1B is where your employer has to actually start doing most of the work. When you start doing an H-1B, the employer has to sponsor you for a job that requires a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty. You, as the employee, must have the degree that is required. It has to be related to the job. It has to be demonstrably related to the job. The employer is required to pay a prevailing wage, which is set federally. There's a website that we go on where we look based on the locality, the job description, and the experience level to determine what that prevailing wage is. And the prevailing wage is either the higher of that rate or the rate that they're paying their other employees and who are similarly situated. At this point, they don't have to advertise and prove that they can't find U.S. workers. They just have to prove that they want to hire you and that you're qualified for the job. We're going to talk about two different kinds of employers. We're going to talk about cap subject employers and cap exempt employers. You've probably heard about the H-1B lottery. Those are our cap subject employers. The majority of employers are cap subject. They're subject to a limit of 85,000 visas that are available each year for new H-1B holders. Cap exempt are these limited different types of employers, specifically nonprofits that are institutions of higher education, are related to institutions of higher education, or are designated research organizations. This group is pretty big for you nursing students because there are tons and tons and tons of medical schools that are attached to hospitals and nursing schools that have to hire RNs all the time. It's important to note that it's not just RNs, it's not just doctors that these cap exempt employers can hire, but every single kind of employee that the company needs, whether that's IT people, research people, lab workers, those kinds of employees are still going to be cap exempt. So it is a pretty good size number of employers, right? But the majority are going to be subject to the cap. So that's what we're going to talk about first is our H-1B lottery. And then we'll talk a little bit about cap subject and cap exempt employers. The issues on your screen apply to all H-1Bs. You have 6 years of H-1B eligibility total as an initial amount of H-1B. Your employer can request those in 3-year increments, but it doesn't matter if they apply for just 1 year, you're still going to have 6 total years. It just means they're going to have to extend your H-1B faster. The scope of H-1B is that you can only work for the H-1B employer who sponsored you. You're going to have an approval notice that designates who that employer is and the dates that you can work. And if you want to change employers, you're going to have them file a new H-1B petition for you. But when they file the petition, you can start working as soon as they file it. That's called H-1B portability. Through this process, all of the fees have to be paid by the employer. What you see on your screen are the costs as they are right this instant. They can't pass any of these fees on to you. You can't pay the attorney fee. They can't withdraw money from your paycheck to pay for the attorney fees. You are not allowed to pay any of the filing fees. The only fee that you're allowed to pay is the second to the last bullet point, which is the optional premium processing. If you want premium processing just for a reason that's convenient to you, not to your employer, then you are allowed to pay that particular fee because it's for your convenience. If it's for a business reason, then your employer would be required to pay that fee, but they can pass it on to you if it's just for you, if it's just your preference. The $4,000 fee at the bottom is not applicable to most cases. This is for cases where almost every employee at the place is an H-1B or an L-1 worker. So it doesn't apply to most employers, only employers that are age dependent. Now, here's the issue for your H-1B lottery. So any for-profit company is going to be subject to this quota, this lottery. Every year it runs from October 1st to September 30th. That's our fiscal year. And employers are allowed to apply 6 months ahead of time for an October 1 start to their H-1B. There are 85,000 H-1B visas available. 20,000 of those are for your U.S. advanced degree employees, so a master's degree or higher. 65,000 can be any person who qualifies for H-1B. We're sitting here in November, and because the employers were allowed to file 6 months ahead of time, there's no availability at this point. These visas have been gone and used up since March of this year. We're looking at this slide here, kind of gives you an idea of how the calendar runs when we're talking about your H-1B. We're looking at a calendar that runs March to September, because the October 1 is your start date for these lottery petitions. That's when the new quota is actually released. But every year between March 6th and 22nd is when they do a pre-registration for these numbers, these 85,000 slots. So what happens is your employer has to create an account on MyUSCIS. They have to enter you into the lottery. They have to pay a $10 fee to do that. And then the government takes all of those entries, they compile them together, they pull out all of the people who have a U.S. master's degree or higher, and they try to select enough entrants to where they'll have a yield of at least 20,000 applicants who have master's degrees or higher. Once they've selected that number, they take all of those master's degree or hires and they put them back into the general pool, and they try to pick enough to get around 65,000 regular cap entries. So if you're looking at this continuum and you graduate in May and you apply for OPT that'll last June to June, then you've already passed when the lottery entry for that year, the year that you're graduating, is going to go through. Now, if you have an employer who you've done internships with, you've done CPT with them, and they know that they want to hire you for H-1B, they can enter you even before you graduate, as long as you're have conferred by the time that you need to apply. So they put your lottery entry in March 6th through 22. Those dates do change every year, but this was this year's numbers. April 1st, we get notified of who's been selected, and then they have 90 days to apply for that H-1B, which means if you graduate in May, you're going to have the degree conferred before you have to apply. Now, if you don't have an employer like that, and you've graduated in May, you start your OPT in June, you're going to want to be thinking right around January with this employer that you're working for during your OPT, you're going to want to be broaching the topic of whether or not they can enter you for the H-1B for the coming year, because that'll give them enough time to figure out how they have to do it, what the rules are, and how they can enter you. If you are a December graduate, then you have a little bit less time to do that, right? You start in December, you're going to want to be thinking about talking to them again in January about entering you in the lottery for March. As I said, you can be entered into the quota even if your degree hasn't been conferred in March, as long as you'll have the degree. That applies to the advanced degree, that applies to the bachelor's degree. It doesn't matter, you can still be entered in the specific quota that you're going to fill in the March lottery entry, as long as you'll have it by May when you need to apply. The other thing on your calendar is, we said if you graduated in May and you started your OPT in June, you would have OPT through the next June, but your H-1B wouldn't start until October the 1st. So they have a special rule called cap gap relief, where if you have OPT at the time that you file your H-1B petition and you're selected in the lottery, they'll automatically extend your OPT through September the 30th to allow you to be able to work on October the 1st. Okay. That doesn't apply to the next thing that we're going to talk about. All right, do we have any questions about this H-1B lottery? It's kind of a confusing thing. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Does anybody want to unmute to ask a question? So the question in the chat.
Asked the question in the chat.
Okay, so the question in the chat is about nursing. The question is, do I have to disregard everything to do with nursing? If you are hired for a nursing job that requires a bachelor's degree or higher as the entry-level requirement, then you can use H-1B. The problem is that most bedside nursing positions only require associates and licensure. The positions that require a master's degree or a doctorate are your nurse practitioner positions, your management positions, there are some like nurse anesthetist positions, things that you cannot do with just an associate's degree and licensure. You're required to have either a bachelor's degree or higher. Those are the only positions that they can sponsor for H-1B. And they can't pretend that it requires a bachelor's degree. So just because that specific hospital requires a bachelor's degree for a bedside nursing position, it still isn't enough typically to get H-1B unless they can prove that every single nurse that does that position within that hospital has a bachelor's or higher. So it's very, very difficult to get H-1B for just a bedside nurse position. And I say just meaning as that entry-level position. We are the hospital with clinicals today. Okay, so somebody's saying that they might have to stay out. Yeah, so I've just gone over whether or not H-1B is an option. In general, for entry-level nursing positions, it's not an option. Let's say that you've been a nurse for years and years and years, and then you went back and got a master's, and now you're wanting to work as a clinical coordinator, right? A lot of those positions do require a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. That would be different, right? Or you are working as a nurse manager, and all of the nurse managers have to have a bachelor's degree, or you're working in a specific clinical area that requires a bachelor's degree, and every single nurse that does that position is required to hold a bachelor's degree. That's the only way that it'll work for nursing. So super specific, your employer almost certainly will know if this specific position that they're offering you qualifies, because we represent hospital systems. They are very, very in need of nurses, in search of nurses. They would love for this to be an option, but they know within their own system which jobs they hire associates and licensure degree nurses for, and which ones that they hire only bachelor masters for. There's no way around it. It's a hard, firm requirement. Okay, so we're talking about CAP exempt organizations. This is where some of the nursing students might find that you have an employer who does require this, right? If they're hiring for a nurse who's going to be monitoring clinicals or doing something like that, or is in an educational area that requires that bachelor's or master's, and they'll know that they're CAP exempt, because these hospital systems do have to use these visas quite frequently. So we're talking about universities, nonprofit organizations affiliated with universities, nonprofit research organizations, and government research organizations. You would be surprised how many entities are covered by this, because they do have a relationship of some sort with a university. Lots of school systems in the United States are CAP exempt because they are related to universities, or they have affiliation agreements with universities. And then some of the strange government organizations that are classified as research organizations would absolutely shock you. So this is where, if your company doesn't get selected, your entry doesn't get selected in the lottery, it may be really important to do research about your employer, your prospective employer, to see if maybe they qualify for this. Some smaller organizations do not realize that they are CAP exempt. You may be the person who lets them know that this is a resource for them. So getting to know the company that you want to work for, super important if and in case they are H-1B exempt, CAP exempt. What this means is that they can apply for as many H-1B visas as they want. They're not limited in time. They're not limited by the lottery system. They're not limited by a quota. They're not limited by month of the year. They can apply for their people to get H-1Bs any time of the year. They don't have to worry about anything to do with the lottery. They do have to meet those other common requirements that we talked about, where the job requires a bachelor's degree. They are limited by the 6-year requirement, and they're limited by that you can only work for them. Okay, nurses. If you are from Canada or Mexico, there's a visa called the TN visa that you would be eligible for as a nursing student. If you're in a different specialty and you're from Canada or Mexico, the TN visa is employment specific, so it's job specific. There's a regulatory list of jobs that can qualify Canadians and Mexican citizens for a TN visa. It's very, very, very similar. The list is very similar to H-1B, but it doesn't include every single thing that H-1B includes. Chile and Singapore have an option called H-1B1 that is very, very similar to the H-1B, and Australia has one called E3 that is very similar. These other options, I don't think that they fit our audience today, so I'm not gonna talk about these. If you happen to be somebody who feels like one of these might apply to you, contact me offline, and we can try to talk about whether or not these options might be good for you. All right, we're gonna talk about the green cards for a second. This is where nursing students have a tiny bit of a leg up. So nursing people who've been hired as nurses are eligible for what's called a Schedule A green card process. They get to bypass this lengthy perm process because it's been established in the United States that we have a shortage of qualified nurses. And so what you get to do is, instead of your employer having to file everything with the Department of Labor, They file only a prevailing wage requirement with the Department of Labor, and then they get to go straight to filing the perm labor certification and an EB-3 I-140 with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services all at the same time. This shaves more than a year off of the processing for their green card process. This was super beneficial a couple of years ago because there wasn't a backlog at all. Right now, there's a bit of a backlog on EB-3, but if you find an employer who wants to sponsor your green card when you're starting your OPT, this is one place where it might be very beneficial for you to broach the topic of green cards with your employer even before you talk about anything to do with H-1B. So a lot of academic medical centers hire people on OPT and go ahead and start the green card process for them as a nurse immediately because they'll already have that quota number. They'll already be able to have a shortened line from other green card applicants from the beginning. So it's a good idea as a nursing student to be aware of and take a look at the information about the Schedule A green card process. The waiting line is such that right now, what happens a lot of the time is that the employer hires the nurse in OPT, starts the green card process when they start OPT, and then encourages them to go to the next level of nursing while they're waiting on their priority date to become current. So let's say that you did a BSN, you want to stay in the US while you wait for your green card number to be available. So you do your OPT and then you enroll in an MSM program while you wait for your priority date to be current. Some systems are allowed to do curricular practical training at that point while they're in their Master of Science nursing program because they're already qualified and they need clinical hours. So what you'll want to be kind of searching for while you're working with this employer is talking to them about what am I going to do if I'm not current when my OPT ends? Do you have a program where I can go back and do my master's and work for you at that point? Those kinds of things. Those are going to be the kinds of considerations you're going to want to be thinking of because you're still going to need to close that gap between when your OPT ends and when you get your green card. And if you do a master's in nursing, you'll have a new year of OPT in case that backlog gets any longer than it already is. You're going to have a lot of support when you do a Schedule A from the immigration attorney doing that. So it's a good idea to use them as a resource. Now, the way that green cards are gotten normally outside of the nursing one that we're just talking about are family relationships, the diversity lottery, or the EB-1, 2, and 3 process. Family relationships, the way to get one of those fast is really an immediate relative. Those processes take less than a year in most cases, but that's just if you're married to a U.S. citizen, or you're the parent of a U.S. citizen who's over 21, or you're the child of a U.S. citizen and you personally are under the age of 21. That's an immediate relative. Those people can get a visa, get a green card based on family in under a year. All of the other family relationships take a really long time for the green card to be approved. If you have one of those cases, definitely talk to an immigration lawyer so that you can get an idea of the timeline. Diversity lottery, you are allowed to enter that as long as you are from one of the countries that's enumerated. If you get selected and you need to file your green card application, talk to an immigration attorney so that you can make sure you're maintaining your F1 while you're doing that and how you can strategize to keep everything straight. EB-1 is extraordinary, outstanding, or multinational. So extraordinary ability people who are famous actors and actresses, physicians who are also researchers or created a specific type of procedure that's they're internationally or nationally known for the procedure that they created. People who do a lot of research and are published or have articles written about them. People who are at the very tip top of their field. That's our EB-1s. Our EB-2 is typically people with a master's degree or higher, and our EB-3 is people with a bachelor's degree or higher. The EB-2 and EB-3 are generally going through this PERM process where your employer has to prove that they can't find U.S. workers to fill your position. They have to do a prevailing wage determination with the Department of Labor that tells them exactly how much they have to pay for the position. They have to recruit for the position and prove that they can't find a U.S. worker. And then they have to file a labor certification with the U.S. Department of Labor. If that gets certified and they can't find any U.S. workers for the position, then they can file your immigrant petition. And that's the process that those nurses are getting to bypass is the perm labor certification before you can file the I-140. Once you've filed one of these I-140 petitions and gotten it approved, you have what's called your priority date, and then you're in a waiting line to know when you can file your actual green card application. During that whole time, you have to maintain non-immigrant status. And the way that you can do that is once you're in the green card process, you can extend your H-1B beyond the normal process. For my nurses on the call, we talked about that you're going to have to find a different way, which would be if you're from Mexico or China or Mexico or Canada, doing a TN visa possibly, or if you're from any other country on the planet, probably re-enrolling, doing your OPT and then re-enrolling in the next level of nursing to maintain your status. With the green card process, you can extend your H-1B if you have an H-1B beyond the 6 years for as long as it takes for you to become current. All right, so that is my presentation. I want to make sure that I can answer any questions that you guys have. So if you have any questions right now, feel free to unmute and ask your questions.
I know you said there's like a backlog of EB3, and I also like read about this. So how like probable do you think it is right now that employers are sponsoring? Because I know like a bunch of places are not because of like the backlog.
And so our office has hundreds of these cases. So there are employers who are sponsoring. The issue is finding the employer who is doing the sponsoring. My advice would be cast a wide net to find an employer that you really like. I would also say if you know of a group that is attached to a medical school or a nursing school, those are good places to look because they have a structure in place to do these sponsorships. They know how long it takes. They know how much it costs. They know how much time is saved, and they know how valuable it is, this process. They have a whole pipeline. These hospitals are huge hospitals. They need the staffing, and they need the nurses. And this is the strategy that they've found to be able to get them. And they love it when they find somebody who's already in the US and can work for them while they do their OPT. And they know that they may have a gap of time, but you can be made eligible for rehire even if you're studying. And a lot of these nursing schools have those master's programs or have those PhD programs. And when they're working with US employees, they're encouraging their nurses to go to those programs, and they're doing things like tuition reimbursement, and they have these established programs that it's possible you could qualify for. So I'd say cast a wide net and look at places that are attached to medical and nursing schools. And you can also look at the Department of Labor and see who's filed prevailing wage determinations in the past. And the only reason that they would file a prevailing wage determination for a nurse is so that they could have them do this Schedule A process. So that would give you an idea of people who have done the process in the past. Those websites are through the Department of Labor. Anytime you're doing research on an immigration process, make sure you're on a .gov website. So Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. There are a lot of predatory websites out there that'll try to charge you for the information, but the information is free and available on the .gov websites. And it stayed available even during the last administration of this guy. So it should stay available still into the future. These sponsorships are available. You just have to find the right employer. Yes.
I have one question. I might be not understanding this correctly too, so correct me if I'm wrong. So the EB3, is that a visa type, or is it like when you're applying for your green card?
So when we talk about visa types, we're talking about immigrant and non-immigrant, right? So EB3 is an immigrant visa classification. So we're just using kind of technical language is all.
Okay. So for instance, let's say I don't want to go back to school after undergrad, right?
You don't, or you do?
No, I don't, hypothetically.
Okay.
So what are my options? Because you said that EB3 is associated with those that are like when you're
Are you
doing
from
your
Canada?
master's.
So
No.
you're one of my nurses, right?
I'm one of the nursing students.
You're one of the nurses. You're not from Canada or Mexico?
No.
There's no other option other than leaving while you wait for your visa number or going back to school. You can try for a B2 visa, but those are only 6-month increments and you wouldn't be allowed to work. If you happen to get married to a US citizen in the interim, I can help you with that. You can get a green card that way. But to maintain a non-immigrant status and to continue living and working in the US, you're going to have to find a visa classification that fits you. And for nurses, the only classification that allows for work authorization right now is TN, and that's only Canadians and Mexicans. And H-1B only if you find a job that does completely require a bachelor's degree or higher.
Which wouldn't be at our entry level for nursing.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So
Exactly. The
planning
majority
to
of
go
those
back-
jobs require a master's,
Mhm.
and so you're going to need to go back anyway.
Gotcha. So planning to do graduate level is probably smart after the
And I
OPT
mean,
graduate.
go look at the statistics. If you go back and do a specialty nursing degree and become a nurse anesthetist, the amount more that you can make over your career is significant, right? So I realize that education is expensive, and I realize that maybe you're burnout and you don't want to have to do it yet, but this is the considerations. They just don't have a visa classification yet that will allow you to work unless you've gotten that advanced degree and found a position that requires a bachelor's degree or higher. The wait right now, I would say, is around 3 years. That gives you just enough time to do your OPT and a master's and get another round of OPT, right? So it kind of fits. And some schools will allow you to work on CPT while you're doing that master's, so you can at least continue to earn.
All right.
I have one more question.
Mhm.
So if I'm graduating in December, I should start talking about work visa to my employer as soon as I get employed, pretty much, because I probably will start working after January.
Yeah,
Um,
so talk to them and say, I only have this OPT until next December.
mhm.
If you want me to be able to work forward, I'm going to need an H-1B visa.
Yeah.
You can enter me into this lottery. It's super cheap to enter the lottery, and you only have to pay for a full petition if I'm selected.
Mhm.
We're happy to talk to people about that. I think, Jen, I sent you all the handouts, right, that you can forward to them. So we have some handouts that just talk about the process that you could give to your employer. If I haven't sent those already, then I'll send them over and she can distribute them to you.
So the question is, they have to enter me in the lottery by March? Is that correct?
March.
Okay. And then did I mention it, or did you mention something about the possibility to extend your OPT?
If you have a STEM degree, if your
Okay.
CIP is a STEM degree, then you can extend it.
I see. Got it. Thank you.
Any more
Okay, I
questions?
think my time is up, you guys. But if if you have any questions, you can contact me using the contact information on the screen. Use the email address because that's how I can get back to you fastest. And it'll also give me a lot more information, background through that email. And I'll be happy to answer the questions as quickly as I can.